work as they were driving around, so he needs a place to stop and plug in. And he says, I've called like 20 churches, and what amazes me, first of all, is there's only 3 that answered, and I'm so glad you answered. The last church that I just got, though, told me that they would only help me if I went to their church, and I don't go to their church. And I said, I'm so sad. That broke my heart. I mean, because he's down and out on his luck, and things are going off for him, but because he doesn't go to their church, there's no help. And I said, boy, that's just like us snobby Christians, isn't it? You know, that we put ourselves in this little group and there's all these little, no, we don't know about you. I don't know if your story is real. I don't know who you are. You could be taking us for a loop or, taking us for a ride or whatever. And so the snobby little Christian attitude comes out, and some of these churches that he'd called were giving him that. And I was like, no, I'm going to be this reflection of goodness. So I said, I'm glad let me have your name, give me your phone number, let me call around so that I can find, and got in touch with somebody who gave me a really good idea to call the state park. So I called the state park out in Fruita and said, hey, can I do this? Can I come out? And he needs electric hookup, and he's got a 10-year-old with him. And I drove out to Fruita and paid for 3 nights, called them back and said, okay, we've got you set up in a state park in Fruita. It's going to be great for you. And it was just the idea to me that why in the world did we not do something nice? We need to be that reflection of goodness. What if we could really put that judgment factor away? And instead of falling back on the, well, I don't know you because you don't go to church here, or prove that you really have a job interview on Tuesday or whatever. No. Just the reflection of goodness, what Jesus would do. He walked up to that Samaritan woman and started talking with her. Too many times we do go to where people are. We do, because whether we intentionally go there or it's because they're just in our society, but we get there and we don't act like Christ. We start being a reflection of our society rather than a reflection of goodness. And what if that changed? How many hurting people are out there and they're there and hurting, and we don't approach them because they're dressed in black goth clothes? How many drug users do we know that we just stay away from because we think their lifestyle's icky, so we just get out, stay away from it? Or perhaps it's that we see someone and suspect they may be an illegal immigrant, and so we'll have nothing to do with them. We start putting these labels and having this judgment factor on people. And maybe it's smokers, maybe it's meth users, maybe it's homosexuals, or it's people of different race, or rich people, or drinkers, or the homeless. This list could go on of who we have a judgment factor on. And Jesus instead had conversations with those kind of people. We see him in the Bible interacting with sick people and dying people and diseased people and addicted people and the outcasts and the tax collectors and the adulterers and the prostitutes and the poor people and the sinners, people just like us who need to have him. And so he went out and started conversations with them. You see, Jesus saw this woman at the well. He saw her in her weariness. He saw this worldliness. And he just starts talking to her. He goes up to her and strikes up this conversation. Hey, can I have a drink of water with you? And she's just blown away. Just blown away. But we're to be a reflection of him. Having these conversations with everyone, because everyone needs to hear it. We did. We needed to hear it. And just like Young Life's mantra is every kid, everywhere, I think Jesus' mantra is anyone, anywhere. And that should be ours. And so the first step to this conversation is point 3. Discover what you have in common. Discover what you have in common. And there's a bunch of verses here in verses 10 through 14 that talk about this. So here's this woman at the well, and Jesus gets up and starts talking to her. And he doesn't go up and start talking to her about heaven and hell and sexual sin and condemnation and infidelity and fornication. No. He doesn't go there. Instead, he's like, what could we talk about? Something natural, something we've got in common. water. Let's talk about water. She's at the well at the middle of the day. It's July 15th, Grand Junction, Colorado. It's hot. He's been walking around. He's hot. They're at a well. Water's right there. So they start talking about water. And he starts it in verse 7 by saying, hey, can I have a drink? And then it goes on. And he then brings up this, well, I have this living water. Boy, if we could have living water. And she goes, living water? What do you mean living water? Because she's thinking running water. Because at the time, that's what living water meant. It wasn't water in a well. It was running. It was living. So what do you mean about living water? I mean, don't you know about Jacob's well? This is the best well in the whole region. It's been here a long time. It takes care of a lot of people. And so they're in this big conversation about water. And he just starts talking to him about something that they've got in common. And eventually, there's this talk that moves from what's going on with water and we have in common to this slow move over to this spiritual conversation. You know, we did that with Tim. We spent a lot of time talking about baseball and school and girls and girls and girls. We had a lot of conversations about things like that. And he came and would occasionally spend the night with us. And in his overnight bag, he carried a can of spray starch because he liked to iron his shirts and spray the collars for the girls. I've never been able to look at spray starch again the same way, and we certainly don't carry it around in our overnight bags. But anyway, we were having these conversations, and with Tim, it wasn't churchy stuff. It's about what's going on in his life. And we had to build that relationship up with him. We would have these conversations, and then we'd make sure that we went and saw him at lunch, and we'd have him to our house. And we even went as far as let Tim come and babysit our boys. And my oldest boy, Bo, was about 4.5, and Keenan was about 1.5. And so we've got Tim over to babysit one night, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. And as we're getting home, we're going in, I hope everything's okay. We walk in, the kids are having a great time. Bo's like, Mom, let me show you this. Guess what Tim taught? Well, Tim taught him this really great game called couch vaulting. And so now my son has this great couch vault going on. But you know what? The great thing was Tim knew that we trusted him, cared about him, loved him, and he knew that long before he made a commitment to Jesus Christ. Tad and I were ready for that to happen a lot sooner than when Tim was. And we had to be patient and just keep having these conversations with him and finding the things that he did and focusing on Tim. Eventually our talks did turn more to choices and decisions and dreams and consequences and finally, yes, to God. It finally got there. But it had to be when Tim was ready. And we made sure that our conversations with Tim were about Tim because he was a real person with real issues going on in his life and real needs. And we knew that for him to focus on anything else, like on us or our agenda, would have been wrong. So we focused in on him. And that is the fourth point, that you focus on the other person. You focus on the other person. And sometimes it's hard because we end up in relationships with people or we walk up and start meeting someone, we find something out about them, and we flinch. And all of a sudden it turns inward and we start thinking, oh, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with the stuff that this person's just unpacking. But you know, if you look at the point of the story where we are right now, these verses 16 and 17, Jesus has been talking with her and they've gone through this conversation and it's woven its way around from what they have in common to this living water. And the focus is still on her, but it is not condemning. In verses 16 and 17, he says, hey, go call your husband and you guys come back. Well, I have no husband, she replies. And Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. And I really think that this was actually a very soft, kind conversation. It was not condemning. It was as if he was saying, hey, I know about your life. I know what's going on. And I'm going to stay right here and continue this conversation with you anyway. I know what's going on, and I appreciate that you'd be honest with me and tell me that. And her reaction to all of that is she stays there and talks to him. We see in these next verses that they have this long conversation. The conversation goes from what she knows about God and the church and the Messiah and different things coming on. And, what if when you walk up to someone and you have these conversations because you start buying into the, hey, can we talk? And looking for people to go talk to. And you walk up and you start these conversations and you find out there's something different about them, but we echo the way Jesus had the conversations. I know for me that the last couple of years, one of the epiphanies that I have had is about motorcycle riders. Because I used to see them and go, oh, they scared me. I've always known them as Hell's Angels. And so I'd see these guys in black leather and unruly hair and lots of tattoos, and I'd think, they're not good people. Well, now, since I've got to know so many of them, when I see them, instead of slowing down so that my car doesn't get anywhere near them and they can just hurry and drive past me, I speed up a little to see if they've got the Band of Brothers badge on the back of their stuff, so I can say, hey, I probably know you guys, because if you're Band of Brothers, I have a good idea who you are. And if they're not, then what if I go up to them and say, hey, I really like your hog. I never say that because it's way uncomfortable for me. I say, hey, that is a nice Harley Davidson. I've been seeing a lot of those lately. Do you like to ride? Tell me about your bike. That is really cool. Where do you like to ride? Who do you ride with? Do you like to ride in groups, or do you like to ride alone? And I start this conversation focusing on them and hoping, just like eventually with this woman at the well, you have this opening because they naturally open up. Where eventually in this conversation I can say, hey, you know what? There's this group of men and women, and they meet once a month. I think it's the third Sunday of the month in our church parking lot, and they go take a big long ride together. And sometimes they go to Moab and have lunch and come back. Other times it's over the mesa. You should come sometime, and not to church. I just want you to come and do this motorcycle ride with all these Harley guys. I think you'd really like it. All of a sudden, we've made an in with somebody I used to flee from. And it's because I focused on them and didn't focus on myself and flinch away. And now maybe here's a harder one. What about homosexuals? What about that group that, boy, we have a difficult time with, don't we, sometimes? And when I have a conversation and all of a sudden it comes up, and I find out the person I'm talking to, he or she, is gay, my reaction now is, you know what? I have met a lot of really great people in the gay community. What do you like to do? Oh, NASCAR? Wow, who's your favorite driver? I like that new car. I saw that one car, and I love the girl that's driving now. And it was pretty sad when Dale Earnhardt died, wasn't it? Was that hard for you? So you'd like to do that. Well, we start this conversation on what they like. And then pretty soon, we can bridge it over into, hey, you know what? I know these friends, and they go to church with me, and they like NASCAR. I should have you guys all over and do dinner. And they're thinking about putting this group of NASCAR aficionados together, and you'd probably fit right in with them because you all like the same thing. And all of a sudden, that bridge is built. You know, it's just so important that we can look at the focus that we have on these folks as not an inward focus and our own flinching, but on where they are. Because that's what Jesus did. I got to tell you something. The fact that he was talking to a Samaritan, I've said it before, they hated them. They had defiled the race. It was the biggest social chasm of the day. There's nothing that we have now that eclipses that. Maybe something that parallels them. But it was a big deal that Jesus was talking to a Samaritan. And we've got to let that sink in. And he focused on her, not in a condemning way, but in a way to try to build relationship with that woman. And it's that kind of focus with the reflection of goodness that I think would just blow people away. And imagine if in these two scenarios, these people could walk away going, man, that was one of the most kind Christians I've ever met. Maybe God is loving and kind after all. Wouldn't that be a new perspective for them? You see, many of these folks are just like the Samaritan woman at the well. She was very used to her community. And even and especially religious people treating her like dirt. She probably had the idea that God was a lot like that. Hurtful, condemning, judgmental, and mean. And when she met Jesus, because he focused on her and showed such goodness to her, she could look at God as loving and graceful and kind. And so finally, he seemed appealing rather than appalling to this woman, because the way Jesus was. Because Jesus did something very different, and we need to do that too, and that is number 5, that we accept people where you find them. Accept people where you find them. In this long conversation that Jesus is having with this woman, they're talking about husbands and life and God and everything else and church and religious people and where you worship. And she says, all this is going to get cleared up when the Messiah comes and we can talk about it. And we see at the very end of the scripture, verse 26, it says, "Then Jesus declared, 'I who speak to you am he.'" He's able to say, you know what? I'm the Messiah. Hey, the one that I've shown you that I know all about you. I know what you're living in. I know what your lifestyle's like. And I still want to have a relationship with you. Would you like to have that living water? I know everything, and I'm still here. I'm the Messiah. And she was so wowed by his grace and his mercy that she went running back to her village to tell everyone what was going on. You know what Jesus showed us right here? You just catch the fish. You worry about the cleaning up later. You just catch the fish. When we catch fish, we catch them and bring them in and hang them on that little wiry string, and sometimes have to get that little hook thing or that little beater thing out. I don't know what it's called. And you beat them a little bit so that they quit wiggling around. And then you go home and clean them up later when you're done fishing, but you catch first. You see, Jesus didn't expect the people who had spent their lives far away from him to be all cleaned up and holy when he met them. So why do we? Why do we look at it and say people who have spent 20 or 30 or 40 years away from Jesus should be all cleaned up and holy? They shouldn't be. We just catch them. And a few clicks later down our life, we get cleaned up. Jesus knew about this, and that's why he went to drunks and thieves and liars and adulterers and egomaniacs and extortioners and gossips, and sometimes a combination of all of those. And I know that he does it because he came to a 17-year-old girl, me, and he accepted me right where I was, which was this know-it-all, double life leading girl who was experiencing the thrills and spills of high school and lots of experimentation. And he proved to me, anyone, anywhere, and accepted me right where I was. And it happened through my young life leader who said, "Hey, can we talk?" And accepted me even though she knew all about me. And that's what we're supposed to do. And so I have to remember that. When I come up across people and get into relationship with them, that it's just about catching, accepting them where they are. Not trying to clean them up first and then catching them. We don't do that. Not with fishing, not with anything. And if you can think about it like on this scale where over here there's these -10, far away from God. You want to move them to 0 where they meet God, and then they move up to this scale of 10 where their relationship with God has grown. And if we're meeting people who are way down here at -10 and accepting them